Rudy Valentino Jr., producer, engineer, songwriter, arranger, and guitarist. Thank you very much for taking the call. Where are you at the moment?
I reside in Hamburg, Germany.
And how
Yep.
are things in Germany at the moment with the restrictions in terms of music and gigs and venues?
Well, that's non-existent, just like everywhere else. Um, there's absolutely no change in sight. You know, they've tried to do a few things where you have maybe two people here, two people there, maybe about 100 people. They did that for a little bit, just like everywhere else, you know. But there's really I think we were what I read somewhere we were the first to stop our business, and we will be the last to start again.
You've worked in the studio, some of the names that we can list: Q Tibbard, Horace Andy, Less Than Jake, and you've been out on the road playing with Sammy Deluxe, Owen Casey, and a whole host of others. And you mentioned
Yeah.
that studio work that you do and the live work that you do. We can see the guitars in the background. Which one do you prefer? Do you prefer working in the studio, or do you prefer being on stage out on the road?
Well, I love everything about music. It's what my life has been. I have not grown tired of being on the road. I think that I've been blessed to be in a lot of 4 or 5 star situations, and that's always very pleasant. You travel the world, meeting great people, and having nice venues, and for the most part, good booking agencies and travel things. But that has all gone by the wayside. And that is a reality. That's a reality. I think that most people that have made music to be their profession, which they actually get up every day and do business with, it's changed the whole scheme, which is not unusual for music. I mean, really, when I've been doing it for 45 years, and I can say that in every decade, there have been swift changes that really not many of us had a hand in, from a business standpoint. And this world situation is a human standpoint. So we got to live with what we've been dealt with, whether we think it's just or not. That's beyond my realm. But it's about making music. So you just don't stop what you're doing. So that's how I viewed it.
I mentioned some of the luminaries from the world of reggae that you've worked with, and some ska punk in there as well. But one of the credits that I spotted you got is you got a technical credit on the Blink 182 track, Josie,
Yeah.
Everything's Gonna Be Fine. Was that a stylistic departure for you?
No, listen, I have to tell you, I come from Rochester, New York. That's where my home is. And in the early 90s, a very good friend of mine, another guitar player, in fact, he played he was on tour with, geez, I have to think about it. I Stopped the World and Melt With You, that band from the 80s from England. I can't remember who it was. But anyway, he was a pre-internet genius. He had all these great selling ideas about this virtual world. We can make virtual music. And we were all kind of like, okay, we'll follow you. And he started one of the first internet radio shows. Now, as it turned out, we had a studio above a club, right above the stage in Rochester, New York. The club held about 1,200, 1,400 people. So a lot of B-level bands would come through on their tours. Chili Peppers early on. Limp Bizkit was broke out of Rochester, New York. A radio station out of Rochester actually broke Limp Bizkit on the East Coast, and they blew up in America. But anyway, back to the point. Sorry. He would get a hold of the booking agents, and whatever band was coming through, we would make a deal with them that I would record them live, 24 tracks right above the stage. And we would guarantee that back in those days, we had a DAT tape. That's what we would mix to. And I would bounce the DAT tape, and we would guarantee the record label would have it in 24 hours. that means that they could have it, judge it, and decide whether they wanted to use it. Now, we did very well because I think we had over an 85% approval rating. All these bands were coming through, everybody from the early 90s. And I was fortunate to do Blink 182, Less Than Jake, all of these kind of bands that were coming out of California. And I got these live recordings that I did, thousands of songs of these bands. And all of these were live that I had done on the fly. No mix, just a live mix right above the band playing as they were on stage. And it was a nice setup. We had it really soundproof. But that's how I got that credit. And I did a lot of bands of that nature. You know, I remember doing some John Frusciante stuff when he was on tour with the Trulio, what is it called? The guys from Black Flag and all these other guys from California. But anyway, and that came about also because I was an engineer at CBGB's from 79 to 82. So all of these people that we were connected with New York and stuff, so these bands would come through, I would FedEx the DAT tape the next morning right to the record label or right to the management company. And that became an exciting thing for them because they had these really good live recordings that they could use for the bands. And I think I have one with Kid Rock as well that happened.
And CBGBs in that period, 79 to 82, I mean, that's a hotbed of musical influence, you know, not just really, really good gigs. I mean, the bands that passed through there, it's a legendary, or it was a legendary venue. Unfortunately, it's closed down now, but that must have been some place to be in that period.
Well, I really loved New York. And I was blessed to get that gig. And probably some of my most favorite time is if you go on YouTube, actually, there's this live Bad Brains from CBGB's in 82. And I was their main engineer from I want to say 80 through 82. I did a lot of shows with them, and they would come up from Washington and they'd call me and they say, hey, you're available, you know, and then I'd go work at the Ritz or one of those clubs with them. And I loved working with them because I was so into rock and reggae together, which has always been my biggest love. And doing the Bad Brains, I mean, they're the godfathers of modern rock. Everything that we really listen to is, you know, the Bad Brains were doing it before pretty much everybody. And that was an incredible experience. I started out as a rock guitar player, like most guys from the 60s, okay? I saw Hendrix when I was 14, and all of that influenced me so much. You know, I was in a lot of rock bands, and I was in a very, very popular rock band in New York City, in Long Island, New York City area in the 70s, and I lived there. And I got to see all types of music and witnessed all the different types of people that I always found that fascinating, that liked the music itself too, you know. And one time I went back home for a vacation to visit my family, and my best friends that I had played with for years, ever since we were teenagers, were playing this reggae music. They had a farm, and all they did was play. And they actually became the band for Lee Perry, Scratch, when he came over and played with the Clash. They were called the Majestics. And these were Ron Stackman is my best friend for life. We grew up together. He's the main guy from the Majestics. They were playing New York and Boston like crazy. And I, living in New York City and being an upstate boy, I had this thing. I wasn't used to New York being so flashy and so, you know, it had a shtick about everything. You know, there was all sorts of things going on that were always kind of a little too thought out for me. And I had reached a point in rock music, and this is right before the music actually started heading to LA. because in New York at that time, it was all about music. New York was a very dangerous place to live in then, but the art was unbelievable. It was just great. But for me, I was getting a little tired. And when I went back home for a visit, I spent a week with my friends and really listened to this music. And I came back to New York and I found WLIB on AM radio station in New York City. And WLIB was the Caribbean record radio station in those days for New York City. And I just immersed myself in reggae music. I think the very first song that came out of my speakers was Max Romeo. What's the one? Lucifer, son of the morning. You know, that tune there.
Chase the Devil, I think is
yes,
one, is it?
the very first song. And when I heard that, I said, that's it, I'm done. Because then I started, a friend of mine, Mike Keisha, who actually ended up becoming Toots's manager for 40 years. He and I grew up together and were in high school together. See, life is kind of funny. It's very interesting. And he was working with Earl Chin in Boston and Rounder Records, and they were videotaping all of this reggae stuff coming up from Jamaica. 1973, 1974, 1975. And they also were the first guys to videotape Aerosmith in rehearsal. This was before any type of video stuff. But anyway, he started feeding us these videos. And I was watching the stuff from England with Marley, because you got to remember, you didn't have YouTube or nothing back then. And I was watching these videos from Marley, from the band when they first went over to England, and they were harder than any rock band that I had been seeing lately out in New York. And I said, you know what? This is for real. And the lyrics, of course, the lyrics were so real. And it just changed me. Right there, I said, you know what? This is a purpose. There is a purpose to this music. I moved back to Rochester and I built a studio, and Mike Keisha started sending artists to me that would come up on the East Coast to tour. And then I joined the Majestics, and then we toured with Burning Spear and Big Youth and all of that. And that was just, I was definitely hooked.
We talked about at the start of this conversation about where we find ourselves now in the situation where we are with not a lot of gigs, and that communal expression, you know, people coming together to enjoy music, that how music is listened to is changing slightly. Do you think that there's still that opportunity for music to affect that kind of change that you felt when you were young?
I think every time has its own moment. And I think what we went through as young people, like I said, there was an inertia that was happening. There were so many bodies. There were so many humans focused on one thing, that is what pushed and the music was the vehicle. And let's going back to where we first started talking. My biggest fear is that music, it will lose its importance to people. This is a problem for me because it became so important in my life, and not so much just identity or the human thing that we have that we need to identify with something, but the fact that it was such, listening to a record was like reading a book. You know, if you go through times where the artists are really expressing something that is so endearing to your nature, that you feel like you're right there with them. And that's the power that music has had to at least these last 4 generations. And I'm a little fearful because look at Mark, it's wonderful. I'm looking at you, you look great, man, and everything else. But you know, we're not feeling the energy that you and I would have if we were sitting right there with each other. You know, there's this thing here, maybe people can get used to it. I mean, we're going to have to if that's the way it's going to be. But I myself, along with so many other musicians that I've spoken with, have tried to do the internet thing. You know, playing music for people, still giving people a vibe. Yes, they like it, but you know what? it doesn't have the same thing. And I know that sooner or later, just like rave clubs were in the 80s, I think that people are going to find a way to get together, and come hell or high water, one or the other. I really do, because I think it's in the nature of humans to express themselves. And let's face it, musicians express not for just themselves, but for thousands and thousands of people. When people listen to something or see a live concert, they walk away from that. It's, for many people, it's such an incredible experience, and we forget that. I think right now we're realizing that, you don't know what you got till it's gone, the old expression, and I'm trust me, man, I am so hungry to be on stage. You asked me before, what do I like doing? I like making music no matter what, but to actually see people laugh and enjoy themselves and be and intensely watching what you're doing, and you feel the connection to the hard work that you've done, and that people appreciate it, and the way they speak to you afterwards, and the communication and the communion that you have with people that only brought you together because of the art form. That to me is something that is intrinsic to humanity, and I don't think we're ever going to let that go. We're going to find a way to do it. I pray it isn't under some oppressive type of thing, but I think we're going to find a way to do it. And I miss that, to answer your main question.
Amen, brother. Amen. Yeah. I'm with you on all of that. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, that was so well put. Yeah, and I agree with everything you're saying. And thank you for saying it. It's nice to share that. And even on this forum, this is the International Irish Ska and Reggae Festival,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of music online.
Hold
I see
on.
you have the T-shirt on. Big love. Yeah, nice one. Flying the colours. And the music is online. And I think you're right, that this is what we're doing now. But it's a stopgap. We need to get back to that communal thing. That's what music is, the communal thing. And so well.
But what you're doing is awesome, because you're keeping the link. You're keeping the chain tightened. We need to keep the chain tightened of all the people that we communicate with, that have been involved in what we're doing and promote what we all want to see happen. We have to keep talking. We have to keep the communication open, or else things won't change. Manifestation to me is a very big thing. Humans are very powerful creatures. Many of us don't realize that, but when we realize that our lives are on the line, and what I mean by that is our spiritual well-being that the art brings to us, whether it's visual art or music or whatever it is, all this stuff stimulates who we are as humans and helps us to create in our daily lives, no matter what we do. This is all part of it. And we need to keep the communication together and stay focused on what's going on in the world, because, we do not want to give up what we do. That's the last thing we want. The thing that I'm on, mostly on tour with is that music from the 90s called Enigma. But the interesting part about it is that the singer that probably sang most of the Enigma songs is Jamaican. And the band that we have for the tour is Jamaican. So it's like, it's crazy. It's really awesome. We get to play this Enigma music with a full orchestra every night on stage with us, but we do a lot of reggae stuff with it. It's really sweet. And the people are so appreciative, because you know what? It's Russia. Look how far away they are from Jamaica, So people really appreciate the fact that you're bringing authentically yourself, your culture, to another part of the world. And that always excites me. The first time I went to Ireland with Owen Casey to Traymore, I was so excited. I had never been to Ireland before. And it was such a beautiful experience for me. And the people were awesome. It was just so cool. Actually, I shouldn't say I lied. I shouldn't say, or I misspoke. I had been on tour with Toots. I was in Dublin, played with Toots in Dublin. Yeah, that's right. But as far as performing and actually hanging out with people, beautiful experience. Absolutely great.
Nice one. And I hope that we get to have you back in Ireland very, very soon, sooner rather than later. And I'm looking forward to communing with you face to face and talking
Yes,
to you
sir.
in person.
Very good, Mark. Very good. I look
Rudy,
forward to getting back.
thank you very much.
All right. Peace and love.